In this lesson, we're going to review how to create a pivot table from scratch in Microsoft Excel. Pivot tables are very popular in Excel, and you'll often see it as a required understanding when you're applying for jobs, especially in an accounting and finance role. Pivot tables are useful when you have information that's located within a table or an array of data, and you want to quickly rearrange the data without the use of formula. And so pivot tables can actually provide a very flexible analysis. However, it doesn't automatically refresh. So you need to right click on the pivot table and refresh it if your source data changes. Additionally, if you insert new rows or columns into your source data table, that may not transpose into the pivot table. So in that case, you may need to change the data source of the pivot table in order for the new data to be updated in the pivot table. Before we jump into an example, let's take a look at what the final product of a pivot table looks like. If I jump down the screen here, I can see an example of a pivot table that we created. And the pivot table shows product sales with the product in column C and the amount of sales in column D. We've got hammers, nails, safety plugs, screwdrivers, and the grand total number of sales at the bottom. So where does that information come from? Well, that data is a summation and summarization of the data that's located in the raw data sales report that begins on row 37. So if we go up to row 37, we can see the raw data for the USA Hardware Company appear. And that's the example that we're going to go through. So let's start by reviewing the steps that we need to perform in order to create our pivot table. So the first thing that we need to do in order to create a pivot table is we need to select where in the sheet we want to create our pivot table. Let's say we want to create a pivot table in cell H13. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Insert button in the top navigation pane. Then I'm going to click on the Pivot Table button. And then what I want to do is I want to select the data source. So you see a number of options appear on screen here, and I'm going to select the radio box that says select a table or range of data. So I'm going to select the range that starts in cell C38 through cell H530. And that's going to select all of the data. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select where I want the pivot table to be placed. And I want it to be placed inside the existing worksheet. I don't want it to be in another tab or anything. So I'm going to select existing worksheet. When I click OK, it's going to create a box where the pivot table can then be placed. So there's a few different options that are available to me now. And you can see 4 quadrants appear. There's the filter report, there's the columns, rows, and values. These boxes represent the following information. The report filter is used to display conveniently a subset of data in the pivot table report or PivotChart report. So you're able to filter the pivot report for what data that you want to display. Fields that are put in the row label are listed on the left side of the column of the table. Fields that are put in the column label will have their values listed across the top row of the table. And fields that are put in the value field will be summarized. So let's take a look at how we created our pivot table down below. I'm going to undo the creation of the pivot table that I just made, and I'm going to go down to the pivot table that I've already created. So if I click on it, and then at the top I click on pivot table analysis, I have a few different options available. I can change the data source, I can show the field list on the right side, and I can see how I've set it up. So in this case, I dragged the location into the filters box. Now keep in mind that everything that appears in this top area here under fields, those are the headers that are within my pivot table. I've got sales ledger, name, date, product, amount, and location. So if I were to click on the pivot table, I can see each of those appear as options. But for the pivot table, I just want to capture certain information. For location, I'm going to drop that into the filters box. For amount, I want to drop that into the values field because that's the box where I want to summarize the amounts. And for rows, I want the rows to represent the product. So I put product in there. And as you can see, we've got product along the side, we've got the amount summed, and the location becomes a filter at the top. And right now I have Midwest filtered, but I can change that by selecting other data and other locations. If I were to select all the locations, it's going to automatically summarize the sales of the different products for all locations. I could select just the North location if I wanted to, and it would return the results for just the North, and so on. So the filter is a very useful technique to filter out certain data that you don't want in your pivot table. And there's a number of other options that I now have available to me if I want to further customize the pivot table. So for instance, if I were to click on the sum of amount, I could click on value field settings, and I could very easily capture other information as opposed to taking the sum of the data. I could click on count, and what that's going to do is it's going to count the number of instances there were sales of hammers, nails, safety plugs, and screwdrivers. Instead of taking the sum of the data, I could calculate the average, and that would give me the average amount of sales. And if I go back, I could do other things like calculate the minimum, maximum, the product, etc. But for this analysis, I just want to use the sum, so I'm going to keep it as sum. Additionally, there are some other options that are available, and to give you a sense of what else we could do with the pivot table, we could arrange and stack rank it. In order to do that, we could right click on the data, and then we could either select summarize values by or show values by. If I were to hover over show values by, I can show it as a percentage of the grand total to see the distribution. And if I go back to show values by, there's a number of different options available here. I could rank them from smallest to largest based on product, and that's going to show me the stack rank. And that basically says which products had the lowest to highest amount of sales. Well, hammers had the lowest amount of sales, then nails, safety plugs, and screwdrivers. And if I were to show things the opposite way, rank largest to smallest, it would be in reverse order. So there's a number of different ways we can show the values, but for the purpose of what I'm trying to achieve, I don't want any calculation. I just want to show the actual dollar amount. So I'm going to click on no calculation. Now keep in mind that anytime I were to update the raw data table, it'll actually update the pivot table, and I'm going to go ahead and show you what that looks like. So if we take a look at safety plugs, the total sales is $33.45. If I were to increase one of the line items to $75, and then I right click and refresh the table, the safety plugs now becomes $33.50. So as you can see, the pivot table is not going to automatically update. You just need to right click on it, then click on refresh after you've updated the source table in order for it to appear within the pivot table. So as you can see, pivot tables are pretty quick and easy to be able to slice and dice information and get it the way you want to. I could also rearrange the data within this table by going to pivot table analysis, clicking on field list, and then let's say I didn't want the product along the side, I wanted the location along the side. I could do that by dragging location down, clicking OK, and then I could put product along the top if I wanted to, and I could rearrange the format accordingly. So that's the beauty of using pivot tables. They're pretty flexible to create quick analysis. Hey guys, thanks for watching this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe from you. And if you want to learn more about Microsoft Excel, check out these videos above. And don't forget to check out our website, commercecurve.com, where we have lots of in-depth finance and accounting courses available with full training workbooks. All of our courses come with complete workbooks of lessons, examples, pre-built financial models, and training video. Hope to see you there.